A soft hush falls over a small apartment on the edge of a Soviet city late in the evening. In the gentle dim of a single lamp, shadows dance on wallpaper faded by time. The day's labors are done, and a profound quiet fills the home. In this stillness, the air itself seems to rest, carrying the faint scent of cooked buckwheat and soap from dishes washed and put away. In a corner of the living room, an old woman sits in a well-worn armchair. Her name is Nina Ivanovna. Outside the frosted window, the cityscape is subdued. This old apartment building usually carries the subtle noises of many lives: a muffled radio tune, a baby's whimper, distant steps in the stairwell, but tonight even those are absent. Each family in the building has settled into slumber, creating a shared, profound collective peace. A few late-night tram cars glide in the distance with a low metallic hum, and an occasional gust of wind swirls the powdery snow on the pavement below. From far away comes the faint bark of a dog or the rumble of a last trolley bus returning to the depot, isolated sounds that only underscore the prevailing calm. The glow of street lamps casts long shadows on the wintry street, but here inside Nina's cozy room, all is warmth and stillness. The radiator gently hisses, and the old floorboards, having settled from the day's bustle, offer no sound. It is a pocket of peace amid the sleeping city, a refuge of quiet where memories can gently awaken. Nina Ivanovna's hands are lined and scarred by a lifetime of work, yet they lie calmly in her lap. She absently runs her thumb over a simple gold wedding band, worn smooth by decades, a ring she has never removed, a reminder of youthful promises kept through time. Nearby, on a small shelf, a few mementos catch the lamplight: a black and white family photograph, a bronze labor medal with a frayed red ribbon, a dried sprig of flowers pressed in a frame. These tokens of the past surround her gently as she sits. Nina closes her eyes for a moment. In the silence, one can almost hear the rhythmic echo of years past, the distant clatter of factory machines, the laughter of children playing in a courtyard, the whisper of tired prayers offered under her breath. Each sound is a thread woven into the tapestry of her life. After a long pause, Nina opens her eyes and gazes across the room. On a narrow sofa bed lies her granddaughter Lena, fast asleep under a patched quilt. The young woman's features are soft in slumber, her chest rising and falling in a gentle cadence. By daylight, Lena's brow is often furrowed with the worries of youth, exams and ambitions, and the uncertainty of the future. But now, in rest, she looks as peaceful as a child. Nina's heart swells with affection and a touch of melancholy. Lena is on the cusp of adulthood in a changing era. Yet how much of the old burdens will she still carry? How much of the path trodden by her mother, her grandmother, and those before her will shape her steps? Nina knows that the answers lie partly in the past, in the stories she herself lived, and those passed down by her elders. With a quiet sigh, she leans back in her armchair and lets her mind drift deeper into memory. The journey of so many women like her, across different eras of the Soviet Union, lives within her recollections. They are tales of devotion and duty, of resilience and quiet heroism in everyday life. In her mind's eye, scenes begin to form: a windswept village field during the war, a bustling textile factory floor in the 1950s, a schoolhouse and its chalk-dusted desks, and the small kitchen where 3 generations gather to share the day's last cup of tea. These are the places where the drama of women's lives unfolded under the red banners of state ideals and within the intimate circle of family. Nina opens her eyes once more and looks around the modest room. The lamplight touches the worn edges of the furniture and the tidy stacks of folded laundry waiting for tomorrow. She takes comfort in the introduction. A soft hush falls over a small apartment on the edge of a Soviet city late in the evening. In the gentle dim of a single lamp, shadows dance on wallpaper faded by time. The day's labors are done, and a profound quiet fills the home. In this stillness, the air itself seems to rest, carrying the faint scent of cooked buckwheat and soap from dishes washed and put away. In a corner of the living room, an old woman sits in a well-worn armchair. Her name is Nina Ivanovna. Outside the frosted window, the cityscape is subdued. This old apartment building usually carries the subtle noises of many lives: a muffled radio tune, a baby's whimper, distant steps in the stairwell, but tonight even those are absent. Each family in the building has settled into slumber, creating a shared, profound collective peace. A few late-night tram cars glide in the distance with a low metallic hum, and an occasional gust of wind swirls the powdery snow on the pavement below. From far away comes the faint bark of a dog or the rumble of a last trolley bus returning to the depot, isolated sounds that only underscore the prevailing calm. The glow of street lamps casts long shadows on the wintry street, but here inside Nina's cozy room, all is warmth and stillness. The radiator gently hisses, and the old floorboards, having settled from the day's bustle, offer no sound. It is a pocket of peace amid the sleeping city, a refuge of quiet, where memories can gently awaken. Nina Ivanovna's hands are lined and scarred by a lifetime of work, yet they lie calmly in her lap. She absently runs her thumb over a simple gold wedding band, worn smooth by decades, a ring she has never removed, a reminder of youthful promises kept through time. Nearby, on a small shelf, a few mementos catch the lamplight: a black and white family photograph, a bronze labor medal with a frayed red ribbon, a dried sprig of flowers pressed in a frame. These tokens of the past surround her gently as she sits. Nina closes her eyes for a moment. In the silence, one can almost hear the rhythmic echo of years past. The distant clatter of factory machines, the laughter of children playing in a courtyard, the whisper of tired prayers offered under her breath. Each sound is a thread woven into the tapestry of her life. After a long pause, Nina opens her eyes and gazes across the room. On a narrow sofa bed lies her granddaughter Lena, fast asleep under a patched quilt. The young woman's features are soft in slumber, her chest rising and falling in a gentle cadence. By daylight, Lena's brow is often furrowed with the worries of youth, exams and ambitions, and the uncertainty of the future. But now, in rest, she looks as peaceful as a child. Nina's heart swells with affection and a touch of melancholy. Lena is on the cusp of adulthood in a changing era, yet how much of the old burdens will she still carry? How much of the path trodden by her mother, her grandmother, and those before her will shape her steps? Nina knows that the answers lie partly in the past, in the stories she herself lived, and those passed down by her elders. With a quiet sigh, she leans back in her armchair and lets her mind drift deeper into memory. The journey of so many women like her, across different eras of the Soviet Union, lives within her recollections. They are tales of devotion and duty, of resilience and quiet heroism in everyday life. In her mind's eye, scenes begin to form: a windswept village field during the war, a bustling textile factory floor in the 1950s, a schoolhouse and its chalk-dusted desks, and the small kitchen where 3 generations gather to share the day's last cup of tea. These are the places where the drama of women's lives unfolded, under the red banners of state ideals and within the intimate circle of family. Nina opens her eyes once more and looks around the modest room. The lamplight touches the worn edges of the furniture and the tidy stacks of folded laundry waiting for tomorrow. She takes comfort in the presence of these humble things. Tonight, as the snow falls silently outside, she will let the past and present entwine in a gentle narrative. In this calm, contemplative space, the memories of work and love, of sacrifice and hope, will emerge softly, like fireflies lighting the path for the next generation. And so, with the patience learned from a lifetime of nights like this, Nina Ivanovna begins her inward journey, guiding us back through the decades to see life through the eyes of the women who came before and beside Lena. Each chapter of their story will unfold slowly, like a lullaby of history, carrying us towards sleep. A mother on the collective farm, 1940s. Picture the first light of dawn creeping over a village of wooden cottages during the Great Patriotic War. In one humble house with a sagging thatched roof, a young woman rises before the sun. This is Nana, as a young mother in the 1940s, living in a small rural hamlet and working on a collective farm, the kolkhoz. The roosters have only just begun to crow, and a pale gray light filters through frosted windows. Nina moves quietly so as not to wake her children, who are still bundled together on the warm stove bed. She wraps a threadbare shawl around her shoulders and steps out into the crisp morning air. The world is still except for the crunch of Nina's felt boots on the hard, frosty earth. In the east, the sky blooms with bands of soft pink and gold, revealing flat fields stretching out beyond the village. Those fields are her workplace and her duty. They have been for years now, ever since the Soviet state collectivized the farms and declared that everyone's labor was vital to feeding the nation. Nina was barely out of girlhood when she joined the kolkhoz in the late 1930s, full of youthful energy and cautious hope for the future. Now, a few years later, war engulfs the country, and that hope has been tempered by hardship and loss. Nina pauses by the wooden gate of her yard. Inside the small pen, their 2 goats stir and bleat softly. Sensing her presence, she pats their coarse winter fur and sets about milking one by hand, her fingers red and stiff in the cold dawn. A thin stream of milk pings into the pail with a steady rhythm. This milk will be breakfast for her little ones, 4-year-old Galia and baby Olga, before she leaves for the fields. As she works, her breath forms faint clouds in the chill. She thinks of her husband, Ivan, who left for the front over a year ago, along with most of the village's men. Since then, Nina has had no letters. She keeps his last note, from the winter of 1942, folded carefully in a tin box under her bed. Sometimes at night, she rereads his neat, penciled words by candlelight. "Don't worry about me," he wrote. "Take care of our girls. I will be home as soon as we drive the fascists out." She holds on to those words like a talisman. The sun has barely inched above the horizon by the time Nina finishes her chores at home. The goats are fed, and let out to nibble hay. The morning's milk sits in a covered jug on the kitchen table. Inside, a thin porridge of ground millet simmers on the stove. The warmth of the small kitchen embraces Nina as she steps back in. The house is modest, one main room with a stove, a rough-hewn table, a few stools, and a curtained corner where the family sleeps. Dried herbs hang from the rafters, and an icon of the Madonna and Child glints softly in a high corner, a remnant of old village life that even Soviet modernity has not entirely erased. Nina ladles porridge into 2 pottery bowls. As expected, little Galia has woken, her dark hair mussed from sleep. The child rubs her eyes and smiles up at her mother with a gap-toothed grin. Nina's own mother, old Granny Agafia, emerges from the shadows as well, cradling baby Olga, who fusses to be fed. Babushka Agafia, stooped but strong, gives Nina an encouraging nod. They do not need words. Each day follows a well-worn pattern. Nina quickly eats a few spoonfuls of the warm porridge and drinks a cup of hot water steeped with berry leaves for a hint of flavor. There is no sugar. It's a wartime luxury beyond reach, but she savors the warmth spreading through her. Her mother will tend the children while Nina labors in the fields, as she has since the men went to war. Nina kisses Galia's rosy cheeks and gently touches baby Olga's downy head, then grabs her work gloves and steps out once more. By now, other women from the village are also emerging, figures moving through the morning mist, carrying hoes, sickles, or wicker baskets. They gather at the edge of the village, where a rickety horse-drawn wagon waits to carry them farther out to that day's work site. A few older men and adolescent boys join too. The only males left are the very old, the very young, or the injured. Nina climbs onto the wagon beside her neighbor Marina, a widow whose 2 sons are off fighting. The women share tired, understanding smiles. In the orange glow of sunrise, their breath hangs in the air like faint clouds as they brace themselves for another long day. Over the distant tree line, Nina hears the faint boom of artillery echoing from the front. It's far off, but a constant reminder of the battles raging across the motherland. As the wagon trundles along a frozen dirt path, Nina's thoughts drift to just a few years ago, before the war. Life was not easy then either, but it was different. In the 1930s, under Stalin's rule, the government had pushed to modernize the countryside. They formed these collective farms and talked of tractors and progress. She recalls the propaganda posters that made their way even to their remote village, showing beaming farm girls driving, shiny new tractors, and slogans promising prosperity through communal labor. For a time, Nina even attended evening literacy classes organized by a Komsomol, communist youth thus activist, a city girl who taught the village women to read the newspaper and basic farm bookkeeping. Nina was proud to learn. She loved running her finger along printed lines, sounding out words about crop yields and the bright socialist future. There was talk of mechanizing housework too, communal laundries and cafeterias that would free women from drudgery. Such ideas felt distant in her rural life, but they lit a spark of hope in her heart as a teenager. Reality set in quickly. The new tractor arrived but soon broke down, and fuel was scarce. The village communal kitchen was just a corner of the granary where watery soup was ladled out on workdays, a far cry from the nourishing meals they had imagined. By the late 1930s, Nina married Ivan, a quiet neighbor boy with kind eyes. They moved in with his parents in the very cottage where Nina lives now. She became pregnant with Galia not long after. The state had begun glorifying motherhood then. She remembers an official pamphlet in 1939 praising women who have many children as heroes of the nation. But when Galia was born, there was no fanfare, only Nina and her mother and a village midwife working by the light of an oil lamp on a stormy autumn night. The wagon reaches the expanse of fields by full daylight. The kolkhoz chairman, an elderly man with a limp and tired eyes, assigns tasks for the day. Today, Nina and a group of women will weed and thin a field of sugar beets. In another field, others will gather the late potato harvest from last season's lingering crop. The earth is hard and rutted from the cold. Nina hops down from the wagon, shoulders squared. With a hoe in hand, she joins a line of women spaced out along a frosty row. She can see Marina a few paces away, already bent to her task, and beyond her, young Oksana, who is only 17 but as determined as any adult. Most of these women have known each other all their lives. They work in steady unison, born of shared purpose and necessity. Hours pass in the slow, repetitive rhythm of labor. The sun climbs higher, and the chill of morning gives way to a weak winter warmth. Nina's back aches as she hacks at the stubborn weeds, threatening to choke the beet sprouts. Now and then, she straightens to stretch, pressing a hand to her sore spine. She gazes across the brown expanse of fields. Once, men would have been out here too, guiding horse-drawn plows. Now, with almost all the able-bodied men gone to war, the women do everything. They harness the few remaining oxen. They handle the scythes and spades. They load the heavy sacks of produce. There is an unspoken resolve among them. Whatever happens, the farm must produce food for the front and for their children at home. If that means working from dawn until after dusk, doing what was once men's work on top of their own, then that is what they will do. By midday, the women break briefly for lunch. Nina sits on an overturned bucket and pulls from her satchel a piece of dark rye bread and a boiled potato wrapped in cloth. It isn't much, but she divides the bread and shares a piece with Marina, who misplaced her own in the rush of morning chores. They chew silently, saving their words to conserve energy. Around them, the fields seem endless, but slowly, row by row, their hands make progress. A lark trills overhead in the pale blue sky, and for a moment, Nina closes her eyes to enjoy the simple beauty of its song. It reminds her of earlier springs, when she was a child, and her mother, younger and sprier then, would sing folk tunes while hanging laundry in the yard. The respite is brief. Soon the women are back at work, determined to finish clearing this plot before evening. Despite exhaustion, they find small ways to lift each other's spirits. Marina begins humming an old lullaby under her breath, a gentle melody most of them know. One by one, other voices join in softly, merging in the open air. They sing about a birch tree swaying by a river and a mother waiting for her dear ones to return home. The song is both mournful and comforting. As Nina sings along, she feels tears prick her eyes, thinking of Ivan and all the men far away at war. But she doesn't let the tears fall. Instead, she pours the swell of emotion into her steady hands, pulling one weed after another, one resolute stroke at a time. This shared singing eases the heaviness in their hearts. It is a moment of collective solace, a few minutes where they are not just laborers straining in a field, but women bound together by hope and longing. In those harmonies lies the promise that life will continue, that someday their families will be reunited, that peace will come. At last, the low sun begins to dip toward the horizon, gilding the fields in copper's light. The patch of earth assigned to Nina's brigade is now cleared of weeds. Everyone is bone-weary. Dirt streaks their skirts and kerchiefs. Their hands are blistered and raw. Still, as the farm chairman walks over to inspect the day's work, he nods in gratitude. "Thank you, girls," he says hoarsely, using devchonki, a familiar term, even though many are middle-aged. Every bit helps our victory. They manage tired, proud smiles. One woman, an outspoken grandmother named Polina, replies half-jokingly, "We'll weed our way to Berlin if we must." A ripple of laughter travels through the group. Humor is a necessary salve. Back on the wagon they go, crowded and jostling as it carries them home. The sky has turned a deepening blue, and the first star appears as dusk settles. Nina feels the fatigue in every muscle, but her mind is already shifting to the tasks awaiting her at home. This is the essence of her double burden, though in truth it is a triple burden for women on the collective farm. A full day of waged work in the kolkhoz fields is behind her, but now she must tend to work in her own household, and on the small private garden plot her family cultivates for extra food, and of course, care for her children and aging mother. The wagon creaks as it passes by the village shrine and the shuttered schoolhouse. In the distance, Nina can see smoke curling from cottage chimneys as those at home prepare the evening meal. She silently recites a line from Lenin she once heard. "The real emancipation of women will begin only when we fight against this petty housekeeping." The words float ironically in her mind. There are still no communal cafeterias or magical solutions here. The fight against petty housekeeping remains hers alone for now. When the wagon reaches the village, twilight has fallen. One by one, the women jump off, some hurrying immediately to check on chickens or fetch water from the well. Nina thanks the driver and walks briskly to her home, her shoulders aching but her posture proud. The moment she unlatches her gate, she hears little Galya's excited voice, "Mama's home." The 4-year-old hurtles down the path to greet her, nearly tripping over the hem of her too big dress. Nina scoops up her daughter, summoning the last reserves of her strength to spin her around gently. Galya squeals in delight, wrapping her small arms tightly around Nina's neck. For this brief moment, the pain of the long day recedes, replaced by a warm rush of love. Inside the house, the hearth is aglow. Granny Agafia has kept a small fire going to cook a simple cabbage and potato stew for supper. The aroma of boiled cabbage and onion fills the cozy space. Olga, now a wobbly toddler, clings to her grandmother's skirts, but breaks into a baby-toothed grin when she sees Nina. "Mama," the little one lisps, reaching out her stubby arms. Nina's heart melts as she gathers her youngest into an embrace as well. She can feel the grit on her own face and clothes, but to her children, she is warmth and safety, no matter how tattered her work dress or how calloused her hands. Nina sets the girls down and removes her muddy boots by the door. The moment she sits, she also picks up a basket of potatoes and begins peeling them for the next day. There is no time to waste before exhaustion sets in. As she peels, She listens to her mother quietly recount the small events of the day. How Olga took her first wobbly steps between the chair and the stove. How Galia helped shell some beans. How a neighbor traded them a few carrots for a pinch of salt. These domestic victories and barters are as significant in their world as any news from the front. Dinner is ladled out, a thin stew, but hot and filling when accompanied by rough bread. They eat by the flicker of the oil lamp. The light casts gentle shadows on the log walls as the family huddles close at the little table. For a moment, the 4 generations of women in this household, great-grandmother, grandmother, mother, and 2 little girls, are united in quiet companionship. Outside, the distant rumble of war persists, but here at this table there is a semblance of peace. After supper, chores resume. Nina carefully washes the wooden bowls with precious scraps of soap and cold water. Then she pours heated water from the kettle into a metal wash basin to scrub the dust and sweat from her face and arms. As she wrings out her washcloth, she notices fresh blisters on her palms and sighs. Her mother comes up behind her and gently presses a dry cloth into Nina's hands. "Rest now, dear," Agafia says softly, taking the basin from her. "I'll tidy up. You should put the girls to bed." Gratefully, Nina nods. Her mother's presence is a blessing beyond words. Without Babushka's help at home, Nina cannot imagine how she would manage. In the corner of the room, Nina prepares the sleeping area. The 2 girls share a wide wooden bench bed with a hay-stuffed mattress, and Nina will sleep beside them to keep them warm. She changes Galia and Olga into sleep shirts she sewed from an old linen sheet. The girls, though tired, are still a little fidgety. To calm them, Nina sits on the edge of the bed and begins to hum the same lullaby that she and the women had sung in the fields earlier. This time, her voice is barely above a whisper, gentle and soothing. "Bayou, bayou, little starling, close your eyes and end your day. Mama will guard till the morning, keeping all bad dreams away." As she sings, she strokes their hair in turn. Galia's eyelids flutter and close. Baby Olga suckles on her thumb, already drifting off. In the dim lamplight, Nina's face is illuminated with tenderness. These quiet moments at day's end are perhaps the only time she allows herself to simply be, to express softness after a day of unrelenting strength. Once the children are asleep, Nina carefully slips out of bed. Her mother has also retired on a cot near the stove. Outside, the village is dark and mostly silent. Only an occasional dog's bark or the far-off howl of a train whistle breaks the stillness. Nina takes the oil lamp to the small table and pulls out the tin box from beneath her bed. Opening it, she takes out Ivan's cherished letter once more. The paper is creased and worn from so much handling. She traces his words with her finger. How many more nights will she have to fall asleep without him by her side? She allows herself a brief moment to feel the loneliness, the uncertainty. On a shelf above the table sits a small framed photograph, a rare treasure. It shows Nina and Ivan on their wedding day in 1938. They stand together outside the village council office, both a bit shy, Ivan in a simple suit and Nina in a plain white dress borrowed from a friend. They look impossibly young and hopeful. Nina gazes at the photo and then at the letter. In her weary mind, she whispers a promise. "I will endure, Vanya. I will keep our family safe until you come home." It is both a prayer and a vow. Before blowing out the lamp, Nina picks up a stub of pencil and a scrap of paper the back of an old calendar sheet. In the flickering light, she writes a few lines in response to Ivan, even though she doesn't know when or if she'll be able to send it. She writes by memory, her script uneven but determined, describing Galya's antics and Olga's new steps, describing the spring planting and her constant thoughts of him. She does not mention the shortages or her own fatigue, only sends him words of love and courage. Signing it, "Yours, Nina," she folds the note and tucks it in the tin box with his letter, hopeful that one day he will read it. Finally, Nina lies down between her daughters. Her body sinks into the thin mattress, every limb heavy with weariness. The darkness feels gentle on her eyes. Before sleep claims her, she reflects on the day and the many days like it she has weathered. The war has demanded so much of all of them. She and the other village women have essentially taken on all roles: farmers, providers, protectors, while still nurturing their children and preserving a semblance of home. There is a term emerging for it, though perhaps Nina hasn't heard it yet. A double shift or double burden, when women must work both outside and inside the home. In her case, it's triple. If she lets herself dwell on it, it might feel overwhelming or unfair. But Nina rarely allows those thoughts to take root. She focuses on necessity and on love. The truth is, she takes a quiet pride in her ability to do what must be done. In her own way, she feels she is fighting alongside her husband, he with a rifle at the front, and she with a hoe and a cooking pot here at home. Both are defending their homeland and caring for their family, each on a different front. As she closes her eyes, a distant memory drifts across her mind, a memory of Lenin's words she once heard crackling over a neighbor's radio, back when she was a schoolgirl, that true freedom for women would come when society relieved them of the burdens of housekeeping. In the 1920s, there were dreams of communal kitchens and nurseries to help women like her. But here she is in the 1940s, carrying on the same housework by lantern light after toiling on the land all day. The promised support exists mostly in propaganda posters and pamphlets, not in her village reality. Yet she doesn't feel bitterness in this quiet moment, only longing. Longing for the war to end, for her husband to walk through that door, for a world where her daughters might have it easier than she. That night, Nina drifts into a deep sleep with her arms around her children. Outside, the war-torn world remains full of uncertainty, but within these walls there is warmth and love. She has survived another day, and tomorrow will come with its own tasks and challenges, which she will meet as she always does, with resolve and hope. In years to come, Nina will remember these wartime nights, the sound of the wind over the fields, the closeness of her sleeping girls, and her own unwavering resolve, as a time when she learned the full weight and strength of being a woman, balancing work and home under unimaginable strain. It is a lesson she will carry forward and one day share with those who follow her. Spring of 1945 brought the end of the war at last. Nina will always remember the day the news came. It was early May, and she was in the field with the other women, planting late spring barley, when suddenly the church bell in the village began to ring wildly, a sound not heard in years. At first, they thought it might be a fire or an alarm, but then they saw a figure running from the village, waving a red kerchief and shouting for joy. Word spread like lightning. Germany had surrendered. The war was over. Nina dropped her hoe, heart pounding. The group of women stood still for a moment in disbelief. Then Marina let out a cry and threw her arms around Nina. Some laughed, some sobbed openly. They all hurried back toward the village, abandoning tools in the furrows. As they neared home, they heard cheering and shouts echoing down the main road. Despite years of hardship and rationing, someone had unearthed a hidden bottle of homemade raspberry wine. Small tin cups were being filled and passed around. The usually stern kolkhoz chairman had tears streaming down his face as he embraced each of his workers, repeating, "Thank you. We survived. We won." Nina felt lightheaded with relief and exhilaration. She scooped up little Galia, peppering her face with kisses. "No more bombs, no more war, my dove," she whispered against her daughter's hair. Galia, not fully understanding, giggled at seeing Mama so happy. Great-Grandma Agafia crossed herself and murmured prayers of gratitude, undeterred by any official disapproval at that moment. That night, the village lit a bonfire in the central square. It was a mild May evening. Dusk fell late. Under a violet sky, people gathered to celebrate. They sang folk songs and wartime ballads and shared what little food and drink they could. A few precious potatoes roasted in the embers, a ceremonial spoonful of honey someone had saved for a special day. For the first time in a long time, laughter outnumbered tears. Yet amid the rejoicing, an undercurrent of sorrow ran through the crowd. Nearly every family had an empty place at their table, a loved one who would never return. As others danced or embraced, Nina stood a little apart, gazing up at the stars and thinking of Ivan. She had heard nothing from him in months. She clutched his last letter in her pocket. Deep down, she felt a painful tug of intuition that he was gone. The victory, glorious as it was, came with a weight of grief. In the weeks that followed, official notifications trickled in. In June, a letter arrived confirming what Nina had feared. Ivan had fallen in battle in East Prussia during the final spring offensive. Nina received the news with silent stoicism, hugging her daughters tightly as she wept later in private. The village women who had also lost husbands comforted her. They understood that her personal war had not truly ended with victory. A new battle of widowhood and single motherhood was beginning. Still, life had to go on. The fields needed tending more than ever, for now they must feed a nation rebuilding from ruins. The state acknowledged women like Nina as heroines of the home front. In late 1945, at a small ceremony in the district town, she was awarded a medal and a certificate praising her valiant labor during the war. It was a simple bronze medal that read, "For valiant work in the Great Patriotic War, 1941-1945. Nina accepted it with humility, thinking of all the other women who toiled and sacrificed unseen. The shiny medal felt heavy with the memory of those years. The government also introduced measures to encourage families to recover and grow. They offered modest stipends to war widows and mothers. There were even grand honors for women who bore many children, titles like Mother Heroine for those with 10 or more. When Nina heard about that decree of 1944, she shook her head with wry amazement. 10 children? She could barely imagine raising such a brood alone. 2 were a challenge enough. The state's recognition was appreciated, but it didn't wash clothes or stir the evening stew. Those everyday tasks still fell to her, day in and day out. As 1945 faded into 1946, a harsh peace replaced war. There was another trial, a famine across parts of the country due to drought and devastation. Nina's region was spared the worst, but food remained painfully scarce. She tightened her belt and did what she had always done, found a way. She bartered her labor for sacks of grain from a better off farm, dug up wild turnips in the woods to make soup, stretched every crumb. By 1947, the harvests improved and the shadow of hunger receded somewhat. Through these trials, Nina persevered. She learned that the end of one struggle often marked the beginning of another, but she also learned her own strength. Each night, as she tucked Galia and Olga into bed, she would murmur, "Your mama loves you. We are safe now." In those post-war nights, finally free from the thunder of distant battle, only the chirping of crickets and the sigh of the breeze accompanied her prayers. And with each dawn, she rose again to play her part in the great story of recovery, one weary, hopeful step at a time. Rebuilding and Working, A Textile Worker's Tale, 1950s. The war's end brought relief and new challenges. By the early 1950s, life had begun to stabilize. Nina's daughters grew into young women under her care. Galina, or Galia, as everyone called her, was now a bright-eyed 18-year-old with dreams of her own. Opportunities for girls had widened since Nina's youth. Secondary education was more accessible, and the regime promoted women's participation in all fields of work. Galia did well in school, especially in mathematics, and had a chance to continue studying. But the family's needs were pressing, money was tight, and the village offered little future beyond subsistence farming. So at 18, Galia made the choice that many rural youths did. She went to the city in search of work and a better life. Nina felt a pang letting her eldest leave home, but she also felt pride. The war had taught them both that women must be strong and self-reliant. If Galia could secure a good job in the city, perhaps her life could be less harsh than her mother's had been. With a few rubles sewn into her coat lining and a suitcase holding all her belongings, Galia boarded a crowded train, bound for the nearest industrial town. The year was 1953, Stalin's last year, though they didn't know it yet. As the train chugged away, Nina stood on the platform waving, baby Olga in her arms and tears in her eyes. She silently prayed that the city would be kind to her Galia. Galia's new world was a textile manufacturing city hugging the banks of a wide river. Rows of red brick factory buildings lined the water, their tall chimneys forever puffing white plumes into the sky. The air smelled of damp cotton fibers and machine oil. Through connections via a cousin, Galia secured an entry-level job as a weaver at the Red Star textile factory. It was demanding work, but it came with a small wage and a bed in a women's dormitory attached to the factory. On her first day inside the mill, Galia was overwhelmed by the roar of the machines. In a vast hall, dozens of mechanical looms clattered and thumped in unison, processing threads into fabric. The noise was so great that conversation was nearly impossible without shouting. The air was hot and thick with lint that settled on hair and clothing like pale snow. Experienced women workers, their sleeves rolled up, moved with practiced efficiency between the looms, fixing broken threads, replacing spindles, their faces set in concentration. At 18, Galia was one of the youngest on the floor. A kindly supervisor paired her with a mentor, an older weaver named Yelena Petrovna, to learn the ropes. In those first weeks, Galya's head ached each night from the constant clatter, and her fingers were pricked and raw from handling coarse yarns. But she learned quickly. Yelena taught her how to listen for the subtle change in a machine's rhythm that signaled a problem, how to tie a weaver's knot in an instant to join broken thread ends, and how to wrap a kerchief tightly around her hair so it wouldn't catch in the machinery. As months passed, Galya settled into a routine. She rose before dawn just as her mother had, but now in a cramped dormitory room she shared with 3 other young women. They would jostle for a turn at the communal wash basin in the corridor, dress in their plain work smocks, and hurry to the factory gate by the 7 a.m. whistle. Each day was organized into shifts. Galya often worked the day shift from 7 to 3, but sometimes had to rotate to evenings or nights, which turned her schedule upside down. Despite the early hour, the city bustled with energy even at dawn. Trams clanged down the avenues, and crowds of workers, men and women, poured toward factories, clad in quilted jackets or simple dresses and scarves. Galya felt a sense of purpose being among them. The newspapers were full of optimism. The country was rebuilding, new housing blocks were rising, and production targets soared with each new 5-year plan. Women, the papers said, were fully part of this progress, equal partners in the construction of socialism. Posters on city walls showed smiling female factory workers and engineers urging all to work hard for the motherland. Galya embraced this spirit. She was proud of her role, however small, in making textiles that clothed the nation. In 1955, when she was 20, she was even recognized as a best young worker of her brigade for exceeding her monthly quota by 15%. She received a certificate and a voucher for a new pair of shoes as an award. She sent a photograph of herself holding the certificate back home. Nina showed it to all the neighbors, bursting with pride. Yet alongside the pride, another facet of life was unfolding for Galya, one that introduced her to the same double burden her mother had known, albeit in a new form. That facet was family life. In the dormitory, Galya befriended a soft-spoken mechanic named Victor who maintained the factory's machines. He was a few years older, recently demobilized from the army, and he too had come from a poor village background. Over late evening walks by the river and cups of weak tea in the dormitory canteen, their friendship blossomed into love. They married quietly at the local registry office in 1956, with a handful of co-workers as witnesses. Marriage meant moving out of the single women's dorm. Housing was scarce, a constant refrain in the post-war Soviet Union, where entire cities had to be rebuilt, and new urban migrants like Galya and Victor arrived daily. The young couple was assigned a single room in a dilapidated communal apartment. The building, once a merchant's grand house, had been subdivided among multiple families after the revolution. Now 5 families shared its space. Galya and Victor's room was barely 10 square meters, just enough for a narrow bed, a small wardrobe, and a table by the drafty window. They shared a kitchen and a bathroom with the other residents of the flat. Privacy became a luxury. Every conversation, every crying baby, every clatter of a pot in the kitchen was everyone's business. Still, Galya was happy. In this little room of her own, she and her husband dreamed of their future, and soon that future grew to include a child. Late in 1957, Galia gave birth to a baby boy, whom they named Mikhail, Misha for short. Cradling her newborn at the maternity hospital, Galia felt a rush of emotion, joy, awe, and a tremor of worry. She remembered how tirelessly her own mother had worked to raise her and Olga alone. At least she thought she had Victor by her side and the supposed benefits of a state that promised to support mothers. During her pregnancy, the factory had granted Galia time off for medical checkups and close to her due date, a brief paid maternity leave, about a couple of months in total. It wasn't much, but it was something. When she returned home with little Misha swaddled in blankets, the entire communal apartment came to life with congratulations. Neighbors offered help. One gave a spare cradle, another lent some hand-me-down baby clothes. In those early weeks, Galia experienced the tender side of communal living. The other women, some mothers themselves, took turns showing her how to bathe the baby in a basin, how to swaddle him just right to soothe his cries. Nina even managed to travel from the village and stay for a while, sleeping on the floor of the tiny room to assist her daughter during the delicate postpartum period. But soon, reality set in again. With an infant in arms, nights became fragmented into feedings and lullabies. Victor had an overnight maintenance shift not long after the baby's birth, so he was away many nights. When he was home, he doted on his son, but like many men of the time, he was less sure how to help with diapers or cooking. He would rock the cradle occasionally, or play peekaboo to give Galia a smile, but as the weeks passed, it became clear that most of the domestic work would fall to her and to Nina while she stayed. As the allotted weeks of Galia's maternity leave ticked by, the date loomed when she was expected back at the factory. The state's official maternity leave was short. Despite her longing to spend more time with her infant, the family needed her wages. Many Soviet families depended on two incomes to make ends meet, and theirs was no exception. By early 1958, Galia was back on the factory floor, leaving tiny Misha in Nina's capable hands each morning. It broke her heart to hear him wail when she slipped out the door at dawn, but like her mother before her, she steeled herself and went to work. There was no other choice. A day in Galia's life in the late 1950s was a masterclass in endurance and time management. By 5:30 a.m., she quietly rose from bed in the corner of the communal apartment, careful not to wake Victor or the baby in the dim pre-dawn light. In the shared kitchen down the hall, she lit one burner on the old gas stove to warm a pot of buckwheat geisha for breakfast. Usually, at that hour, at least one other neighbor, often another working mother, was up doing the same. They would exchange polite whispers about the weather or the day's work ahead, acknowledging one another's tired eyes with understanding. By 6:15, Nina, who had extended her stay in the city to help her daughter through the baby's first year, took over minding Misha, freeing Galia to get herself ready for work. Nina slept on a narrow cot in the corner of the kitchen. Space in the young couple's room was too tight, and her presence was an immense relief. Galia knew Misha would be cared for with love in her absence. Many of her co-workers weren't so fortunate. They had to leave their babies in state nurseries or with older siblings, or somehow juggle shifts with their husbands to alternate childcare. After gulping down a cup of tea and a slice of bread, Galia kissed her still sleeping baby's warm cheek and stepped out into the chilly morning. The city streets echoed with the tramp of footsteps as workers marched to their jobs. At the factory gate, she joined the stream of laborers punching time cards and changing into work uniforms. Soon she was back in the cacophony of the weaving hall, where the machines acknowledged no personal sorrows or joys, only the relentless demand for productivity. Throughout the morning, Galia tended a set of looms, moving deftly among them. By now she was a skilled weaver, responsible for several machines at once. Even as she labored, part of her mind remained with her baby. She worried. Did he drink the milk she left? Was Nina managing to soothe him? Did his fever from yesterday truly break? At her loom, amid the clatter and flying lint, she sometimes hummed the lullaby under her breath to calm herself, imagining she was singing to him. At 3 p.m., the end-of-shift whistle finally blew. But unlike some of her male colleagues who could now rest or enjoy a bit of leisure, Galia's work was far from over. Her second shift, the unpaid one at home, awaited. She hurriedly washed up, changed out of her oil-stained work dress, and left the factory with a group of other women who lived in her district. Often, the first stop was the shops. In the 1950s, consumer goods were still limited, and daily shopping for food was a necessity due to a lack of refrigerators and the unpredictability of supplies. Today, for instance, Galia needed to find vegetables and perhaps a scrap of meat for soup. She wanted to bolster Nina's strength and her own, since both were nursing. Galia breastfed Misha, and Nina had been helping feed another neighbor's baby, a not uncommon practice born of necessity among women who had milk to spare. She joined a queue outside the state grocery store. About 20 weary women stood in line, baskets on their arms. As she waited, shifting from foot to foot on aching legs, she overheard snatches of gossip and grumbles. "They say butter might come in tomorrow," one said. "Haven't seen sugar for weeks," lamented another. "At least there are cabbages today," an older woman offered optimistically. Indeed, through the shop window, Galia could see a crate of pale winter cabbages and some muddy potatoes. It would have to do. After nearly half an hour, she managed to buy a modest haul: 2 cabbages, a kilo of potatoes, and a rare treat, a small piece of pork the butcher happened to have that day. Balancing the heavy bag, she made her way back to the apartment as fast as the crowded tram and her tired legs would allow. She was acutely aware that every minute spent in a queue or on the tram was a minute she wasn't with her child or tackling the evening's tasks. Pushing open the door of the communal flat, she was greeted by the mingled aromas of dinner's cooking and a medley of sounds. A radio softly playing a romance song in one room, children squabbling over a toy in another, a kettle whistling on the shared stove down the hall. In the kitchen, she found Nina chopping carrots. The ever-resourceful grandmother had already begun preparing a stew with what they had. Little Misha was awake, lying on a blanket pallet on the floor, gurgling contentedly as one of the neighbor's school-age girls jingled a set of keys above him in play. The sight of her baby safe and happy filled Galia with relief. She thanked the young neighbor and scooped Misha up, covering his face with kisses. Immediately, all the tension of the day seemed to dissolve as he babbled and patted her cheeks with his tiny hands. She held him close, swaying gently, but even in this sweet moment, her eyes scanned the kitchen, taking stock of the evening's work, finish cooking dinner, wash and dry the diapers that had soaked in a bucket all day, iron a clean uniform for tomorrow's shift, scrub the floor of their room if she had the energy. She and Nina worked as a team through the evening. While the stew simmered on the stove, Galia sat at the kitchen table nursing Misha and quietly telling her mother about the events of her day. She described a new technique her brigade leader had introduced to reduce thread breakage and proudly recounted how she fixed a loom jam all by herself. Nina listened with admiration, how her daughter was growing in skill and confidence. But she also noticed the dark circles under Galia's eyes and the way her shoulders slumped when she thought no one was looking. After supper, which they shared quietly in their little room with Victor, who had returned from his construction job, the family routines continued. Victor did help in small ways. That evening, he took it upon himself to wash the dishes and wipe down the table. It wasn't how he was raised. His own father would have considered it women's work, but he cared for Galia and could see how exhausted she was. Still, beyond such minor tasks, the bulk of the second shift remained on the women's shoulders. Victor soon settled into a chair with the newspaper, occasionally bouncing Misha on his knee to give Galia a short break. In the communal bathroom, Galia and Nina worked side by side to scrub the day's laundry, a heap of baby cloths, diapers, and undergarments, all in need of washing. There was no washing machine. Those were luxuries that only a few prosperous families or special institutes had, and even then, Soviet washing machines of the 1950s were primitive and rare. So they did it the old way, by hand. They soaped and scrubbed each piece on a washboard in the tub, then wrung them out with aching wrists. The process took well over an hour and left their fingers wrinkled and stinging. They hung the clothes on lines zigzagging across the kitchen and hallway, where by morning they would mostly dry, perhaps acquiring a faint aroma of tonight's stew in the process, but there was no alternative. By the time night fully fell, little Misha became fussy and ready for sleep. Galias cradled him and softly sang a lullaby, the same lullaby Nina had sung to her in childhood. The other noise in the apartment hushed for a moment. Even the neighbors unconsciously kept their voices down, as if all understood the sanctity of putting a baby to sleep after a long day. Once Misha was tucked into his cradle, finally asleep, Galia faced the final chores. She set about ironing her work smock and kerchief for the next day, heating a heavy cast iron on the stove and pressing out the wrinkles on the small table. Meanwhile, her mother quietly swept the floors and organized the clutter, humming under her breath to keep herself awake. Only very late, as the clock neared midnight, did the two women allow themselves to consider rest. In the tiny room, they made as comfortable a sleeping arrangement as possible, the baby in his cradle, Galia and Victor on the narrow bed, and Nina tiptoeing out to her cot in the kitchen. Before lying down, Galia gently massaged her own neck and shoulders to ease the knots of tension. She glanced at her husband, already dozing with the newspaper fallen on his chest, and managed a fond, if tired, smile. She knew he worked hard too, building new housing blocks all day. In his own way, he was also exhausted. But a small part of her envied that once he left the construction site, his time was largely his own. As she slid under the thin blanket, Her mind raced with what tomorrow would bring. An early feeding for Misha, another shift amid clattering looms, another round of errands and chores. It sometimes felt endless, this cycle of striving to meet everyone's needs and the factory's quotas. She thought of the term she had read in a recent magazine article, Zhenskaya Dolya, a woman's lot or fate. The article had acknowledged how much had changed for women and how much hadn't. Galia knew she had more rights on paper than her great-grandmother did. She had an education. She could vote. She had a job and a measure of economic independence. But in daily life, not much of the traditional workload had been lifted from women's shoulders. They were expected to be exemplary workers and perfect mothers and housekeepers all at once. The ideal Soviet woman was portrayed in magazines as a tireless figure who could do it all with a smile, keep a spotless home, raise intelligent children, and exceed her production targets at work. Galia often recalled a poster in the factory cafeteria that showed a female worker holding a book in one hand and a baby in the other, with a caption, "You can manage everything." Some days she drew strength from that message, telling herself she truly could manage everything because she had to. Other days, especially when she was bone-tired and Misha was cranky with a fever, she felt a hint of bitterness. Was it really possible or fair to expect one person to manage everything? She rarely voiced these thoughts, but once in the communal kitchen, during a rare, quiet Sunday afternoon, she overheard two neighbors talking in low voices. One was complaining that her husband did nothing at home and that exhaustion was ruining her health. Another replied with a cynical chuckle that the so-called women's emancipation just meant emancipation from rest. They called it the double day or double burden. Galia had silently agreed in her heart. Yet as she lay in bed now, in the deep of night with her baby sleeping peacefully nearby, another feeling washed over her, a sense of fulfillment. Tired as she was, she also knew she was carrying on something meaningful. She was providing for her family in a way her peasant ancestors might never have imagined possible for a woman. And she had her mother's legacy of resilience as a guiding light. If Mama could do it, I can too, she told herself firmly. From the next room, through the thin wall, came the muffled sound of a neighbor's radio playing a gentle melody, an old romance tune that a young wife upstairs liked to fall asleep to. The familiar notes soothed Galia's frayed nerves. She reached out in the dark and found Victor's hand, giving it a light squeeze. In his half-sleep, he returned the squeeze, a small gesture of solidarity and love. In the morning, they would all rise and the cycle would start anew. But for now, the communal apartment gradually descended into slumber. The last light was turned off, the halls grew silent, and even the city outside settled into its midnight lull. In her final waking moments, Galia allowed herself a small, hopeful thought. Perhaps in a few years, things will get easier. The newspapers said new housing was being built. Maybe their family would get a separate apartment. Maybe new consumer appliances, like those she had heard were common in America, would become available. A washing machine, even a refrigerator, to ease the drudgery at home. And perhaps, one day, the burden on women would lighten when society found ways to truly share or support the tasks of care. With that hopeful image, of a future where her daughter, if she had a daughter someday, might not have to wash clothes in a tub or race from work to kitchen without rest. Galia drifted into sleep. Her breathing slowed to match the soft snores of her husband and the gentle sighs of her baby. In the darkness, this young textile worker's tiny room held an abundance of love and determination despite its modest size. Thus ended another day of an everyday heroine of the 1950s, a woman balancing the roles of worker, wife, and mother, carrying the double burden with grace and grit, and daring to dream of a brighter tomorrow. In the decade that followed, some aspects of Galia's life slowly improved. By the mid-1960s, the family was granted a new apartment on the city's outskirts, part of the mass housing drive that lifted many from cramped communal quarters. Moving into a small two-room flat of their own felt like a victory. At last, a front door that closed on just their family, a kitchen they didn't have to share. The newfound privacy and bit of space eased some daily strains. In time, they even acquired a few modern appliances, a compact refrigerator, and eventually a semi-automatic washing machine that whirred in the bathroom and spared Galia hours of scrubbing. These conveniences lightened the physical load, but the rhythm of Galia's days remained much the same. She still rose before dawn to stir the morning porridge and joined the throngs on the tram to her factory job. She still spent evenings mending clothes or helping with her child's homework under the yellow kitchen lamp. Her mother, Nina, now retired from farm work and growing more frail, came to live with them in the 1970s and became the ever-present babushka, folding laundry with arthritic hands and imparting old wisdom to her grandson. With 3 generations under one roof once more, they formed a small, steadfast support system, everyone pitching in as they could. On rare quiet nights, after the children were asleep and the apartment finally stilled, Galia would sit by the window, as her mother once did, gazing at the moonlit sky. She sometimes marveled at how far they had come, from the hungry, war-torn days of her childhood to this moment of relative comfort. The city around her was changing too. New shops, brighter prospects, young women like her nieces entering university, dreaming big. Galia felt proud that her toil contributed to that progress. Yet she also knew the essence of her daily experience wasn't so different from her mother's or grandmother's. Work and family, worry and love, those continued to shape her existence. Still, the hope that had sparked in her youth remained alive. The hope that her own daughter and granddaughters might know an easier balance one day. On those nights, Galia would close her eyes and quietly thank her mother for the strength passed down and vow to pass it in turn to the next generation. The Schoolteacher's Balancing Act, 1960s-1970s. Across the years, the Soviet Union moved from the fiery trials of war and Reconstruction into an era of new hopes and ongoing challenges. By the 1960s, the country looked toward a brighter future. Khrushchev, having taken the helm after Stalin's death, promised that communism and abundance was on the horizon. Culturally, the Ottopel, the thaw, brought a gentler climate and a flowering of new ideas in literature and art. In this changing world, Nina's younger daughter, Olga, came of age. Olga chose a path in education, becoming a school teacher, a guardian of the next generation, tasked with instilling both knowledge and socialist ideals. Olga had always been studious. As a child in the village school, she adored her kindly teacher and often played classroom with her dolls beneath the apple tree. Perhaps seeing her older sister go off to a factory job made Olga yearn for a different life, one filled not with the clatter of machines, but with books, chalkboards, and the laughter of children in a sunlit classroom. With Nina's encouragement, Olga pursued her studies diligently. In the late 1950s, she earned a spot at a teacher's institute in a nearby town, one of many young women seizing the expanded educational opportunities of the post-war era. By 1963, Olga graduated as a qualified primary school teacher. She was posted to a school in a medium-sized town not far from where her sister lived, though the sisters now had their own busy lives and saw each other mainly on holidays. Olga married a fellow educator, Pavel, a history teacher at the local secondary school. He was an earnest man, a party member who sincerely believed in the noble mission of Soviet education and the promise of the socialist system. Together, they were an emblem of the new Soviet intelligentsia, modestly paid, highly respected in society, and entrusted with shaping young minds. On a crisp September morning in 1965, Olga stood before her very first class of pupils. They were second graders, about 25 boys and girls, all in neat pinafores and little red star pins on their shirts, for those who had joined the Young Pioneers, the Communist Children's Organization. Sunlight streamed through tall windows onto the wooden desks. On the wall above the blackboard hung portraits of Lenin and the current party leader, Brezhnev, and bright posters encouraged students, study well, work hard, help build communism. Olga wore a simple blue dress and had arranged her hair neatly. Despite her nerves fluttering, she smiled warmly at the curious faces looking up at her. She began the day as all school days began then, by saying, "Good morning, children," and hearing their sing-song response, "Good morning, teacher." Next came the pledge to the flag and a short recitation of the Young Pioneers' motto, "Always prepared." Even the littlest children knew these routines. Patriotism and discipline were woven into daily rituals. Teaching gave Olga deep satisfaction. She loved guiding children as they learned to read and write, watching their eyes light up with understanding. She made her classroom bright with handmade posters of the alphabet, seasonal nature drawings, and the children's own artwork. She believed in the power of education to uplift and enlighten. After all, she herself had been lifted from a poor rural background by schooling, and she took seriously the charge to inculcate good Soviet citizenship. She taught her pupils songs about Lenin and stories of revolutionary heroes. She organized little performances for the many patriotic holidays that dotted the calendar, making sure each child had a line to say for International Workers' Day on May 1st, or a small bouquet to present to their mothers on International Women's Day on March 8th. But being a teacher also meant walking a fine line between genuine education and strict ideology. There were set curricula, and certain subjects, especially history and social studies, were to be taught with the approved interpretation. Even with young children, teachers had guidelines on shaping their worldview. Once, in a staff meeting in the late 60s, Olga and her colleagues were reminded by the principal, "Every lesson, comrades, even arithmetic, should subtly reinforce the values of collectivism and socialist pride. A math problem can be about factory workers producing goods or farmers harvesting wheat. We must always be mindful We are raising builders of communism, not just individual thinkers. Olga took this to heart. She dutifully crafted math problems about sharing apples among pioneers and reading passages about friendly children on a collective farm. She led her class in commemorating Revolution Day each November, helping them paste together red paper, stars, and rehearse simple speeches like, "Thank you, Grandpa Lenin, for our happy childhood." It all seemed benign and important, though at times, late at night while grading, she felt a tug of something, perhaps a wish that she could allow more open discussion or unstructured play. But these feelings were faint and easily pushed aside by the momentum of duty and the constant demands on her time. As the 1960s progressed, Olga's life grew more complex. She and Pavel started a family of their own. Their first child, a girl named Vera, was born in 1966. A son, Sasha, followed in 1969. During these years, the family experienced a welcome improvement in living conditions thanks to Khrushchev's housing program. In 1968, they received a new apartment, a two-room flat in one of the fresh concrete high-rises on the town's outskirts. It was small, around 40 square meters, but it was all theirs. No more communal living with strangers. Olga nearly cried with joy the first night they slept there, free from the constant background noise of others. She finally had her own kitchen, tiny as it was, where she could cook without jostling for stove space, and a private bathroom with hot water on most days. This Khrushchevka apartment felt like a palace compared to her sister's cramped communal room back in the 50s. However, having a more comfortable home did not mean less work. In fact, it sometimes meant more. Without other families around to share chores, everything fell solely to Olga when she was at home, and by the late 60s, Nina's health had begun to decline. She could no longer hop between daughters to help with grandkids as she once did. Nina mostly stayed with Galia, where she felt most needed, so Olga had to find support elsewhere. Fortunately, her mother-in-law, Tamara, moved in with them after her own husband passed. Tamara was a traditional older woman from a village, stout and silver-haired, with strong hands that never seemed to tire of housework. She lovingly took over many domestic duties, cooking hearty stews and porridge while Olga and Pavel were at work, and watching little Vera and baby Sasha during the day. Once again, a grandmother's presence proved invaluable in keeping a household running when both parents had careers. In the evenings, when Olga returned from school, she would find dinner ready and her children fed thanks to Tamara. This was a blessing, yet it also brought new dynamics to navigate. Tamara had her own ways and beliefs, rooted in pre-revolutionary traditions. Though she never challenged the official atheist ideology openly, she quietly imparted to her grandchildren the folk wisdom and customs she knew. For instance, Olga came home one day to find Vera, then age 4, proudly wearing a little cross on a string around her neck. "Babushka gave it to me," the child exclaimed. Olga's heart skipped a beat. A cross? Religion was a sensitive subject. The Soviet state was officially secular and frowned upon religious symbols, especially given to children. In private, Olga gently asked her mother-in-law about it. Tamara smiled softly and said, "It was mine from when I was a girl. A little protection won't hurt them, dear. These times are different, I know, but some things kept me strong through all the hard years. It's just a keepsake." Olga felt conflicted. She respected Tamara and was deeply grateful for her care, but as a teacher and a party member, she had internalized the view that such religious tokens were superstitions of the past. Still, seeing how happy Vera was with her shiny gift, she hadn't the heart to take it away. Instead, she made a compromise in her mind. The children could keep Babushka's tokens and hear her old stories about saints or Christmas, but Olga would ensure to teach them the right Soviet viewpoint as they grew, that these were cultural curiosities, not literal truths. This was one of many small adjustments that came with having an older generation under the same roof. Tamara would, on occasion, slip out early on a Sunday to attend church discreetly or whisper a blessing over the children at bedtime. Olga pretended not to notice. After all, Tamara never interfered with the children's participation in Soviet life. She even helped sew Vera's little pioneer scarf and made sure their school uniforms were immaculate. In fact, it was Tamara who meticulously hand-stitched a red star patch onto Vera's school blouse for a holiday performance. The grandmother lived in two worlds, one of her heartfelt traditions and one of loyalty to the system her son and daughter-in-law served. Meanwhile, Olga navigated her own double world, the public persona of the exemplary Soviet teacher and the private struggles of a mother and daughter-in-law at home. A typical day for Olga in the 1970s started early, much like her sisters, but with a different rhythm. Around 6 a.m., she would rise in the dim light of dawn to grade a few leftover homework notebooks in the quiet hush before the children woke, a cup of chicory coffee warming her hands. The small desk in the living room was often piled with exercise books filled with careful cursive, crayon drawings from her youngest pupils, and her lesson plan book where she recorded attendance and marks. With two young children of her own, she had to snatch grading time whenever possible, sometimes at night after everyone slept, sometimes at first light. By 7 a.m., the apartment began to stir. Little Vera, now a second grader at the very same school where Olga taught, though in a different class to give her some independence, needed help getting dressed and packing her satchel. Tamara braided Vera's hair into neat pigtails, while Olga prepared tea and bread with butter for breakfast. Pavel ironed his shirt in the next room, listening to the morning news on the radio. Reports about bountiful harvests, technological successes, and the latest speeches from party congresses, the optimistic drumbeat of Brezhnev-era propaganda. Toddler Sasha was usually the last to wake, padding out of his room with cheeks flushed from sleep, clutching his worn stuffed bunny. The family convened for a brief breakfast around the small kitchen table. These moments were precious to Olga, a calm before the long day. Tamara fed Sasha porridge, and everyone ate quickly. By 8 a.m., it was time to depart. Olga donned her coat and picked up her bulging satchel of student work and teaching aids. She gave each child a kiss. Vera would walk with her partway since the school was en route, and Tamara would later walk Sasha to the nearby kindergarten for his half-day program. At school, Olga's responsibilities extended beyond teaching her own class. She supervised the young pioneer troop at the school, organizing their after-class activities, like nature outings to pick up litter, teaching civic responsibility, or meetings where they learned about heroes like Yuri Gagarin and Valentina Tereshkova, the cosmonauts. The ideological aspect of her job had, if anything, grown more pronounced over time. After the relative openness of Khrushchev's thaw, the 1970s under Brezhnev were an era of subtle stagnation and renewed emphasis on traditional values, including a reassertion of family roles. Official messages extolled women as both diligent workers and keepers of the hearth, expected to raise morally upright children for the motherland. In staff meetings, concerns were often raised about youth discipline and making sure Western decadent influences, like rock music or blue jeans, did not corrupt Soviet children. As a teacher, Olga sometimes felt caught in a current of social change she couldn't fully control. The late 60s and 70s saw Soviet society becoming a bit weary. Some of her older students were less enthusiastic about communist slogans than she remembered being at their age. They dutifully parroted what was needed, but in quiet moments, a few bold teenagers would ask her candid questions like, "Teacher, will we really live under communism by 1980? They promised it, but it doesn't seem so." Olga would gently rebuke such skepticism, reminding them to trust in the party's vision, but inside she too wondered. 1980 was not far off, and daily life was still full of mundane struggles. Even she had begun to doubt that utopia was around the corner. Yet bright spots abounded. She truly cherished guiding her pupils. On International Women's Day in 1975, for example, Olga experienced one of those rewarding moments that make the double load feel worthwhile. When she arrived at her classroom that March morning, the holiday fell on a school day that year. She found the children giggling and huddled around her desk. They had conspired to surprise her. On the desk lay a bouquet of paper flowers, painstakingly crafted from colored tissue and wire, and a big handmade card that read, "To our dear teacher, happy March 8th. Inside, each child had signed their name in wobbly handwriting. Some had drawn little hearts or added simple messages like, "Thank you for teaching us," and "We love you." Olga was moved to tears. She gathered the children around and thanked them, her voice soft and full of emotion. In that moment, all the fatigue, the low salary, the sometimes burdensome party directives, they all receded. She felt only the pure love of her students. The other teachers also received flowers and small gifts that day. In the afternoon, the school principal, a gruff, middle-aged man, made a formal speech in the teachers' lounge praising the selfless work of our women teachers who give their heart and soul to the children. They were each handed a single red carnation from the local party committee, a token of appreciation. Olga went home that day with the paper bouquet and the carnation, feeling recognized if only for a moment. At home that evening, little Vera, who had helped her classmates plan the surprise, delightedly recounted how they pulled it off. And Pavel brought home a rare treat, a small box of chocolates, to celebrate Olga as well. The family shared those chocolates after dinner, savoring the sweetness and the rare sense of festivity. Such moments were like gentle rest stops on the long road of daily obligations, giving Olga the strength to keep going. However, the relentless nature of her responsibilities did at times take a toll on Olga's health and spirit. By the late 1970s, she occasionally suffered migraines. On some evenings, she would lay her head on the table while grading, eyes closed against the throbbing pain, until a concerned Pavel or Tamara urged her to rest and finish in the morning. There were also instances of sheer emotional exhaustion, days when a troubling issue with a student coincided with one of her own children falling ill, and Olga felt torn in two. One bitterly cold winter morning, she heard Sasha coughing harshly in his bed. When Olga entered the children's small room, she found her 9-year-old son flushed with fever, his forehead hot to the touch. Sasha's eyes were glassy with illness as he murmured, "Mama, I don't feel good." Olga's heart clenched. He had been fighting a cold for days, and it seemed to have worsened overnight. A glance at the clock told her it was nearly 7 a.m. Soon she needed to be at school to greet her pupils. That day, her class was scheduled to perform a short program at the school assembly, a patriotic skit they'd rehearsed all week. As class teacher, she was in charge. It felt unthinkable to miss it. Yet here was her child, cheeks burning, small body racked with coughs, needing his mother. For a moment, Olga stood at Sasha's bedside, torn in two directions. In the dim morning light, she stroked his damp hair off his forehead. "Shh, I'm here," she whispered. "Mama's here." He gazed up at her, trust and pleading in his fever-bright eyes. "Will you stay home, Mama?" he asked hoarsely between coughs. How Olga wanted to say yes. She imagined curling up with him, keeping a cool compress on his head, reading him gentle stories until he fell asleep. But even as these thoughts flashed through her mind, she was calculating. If she didn't show up at school, who would manage her class's assembly performance? Would the principal think her irresponsible? There was no telephone in their apartment to call in. Such conveniences were still rare. So if she were to stay, she'd have to send word somehow. And Tamara, dear babushka Tamara, wasn't strong enough to handle Sasha's care alone if he took a turn for the worse. With a deep breath, Olga made a decision born of necessity. She gently kissed Sasha's warm forehead. "Mama has to go to school for a little while, my love," she murmured, voice heavy with regret. "But babushka will be with you, and I promise I'll come back as soon as I can." Sasha's face crumpled in disappointment. "Please don't go," he rasped, one small hand gripping her sleeve. Olga felt a stab of pain in her chest. It took all her willpower not to cry herself. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," she said, her voice catching. "I'll be home before you know it. Babushka will stay right by your side, and I'll check on you at lunchtime, I swear." She disentangled his fingers gently from her sleeve and tucked the blanket snug around him. Tamara appeared in the doorway, a cup of warm herbal tea in hand and worry in her eyes. The older woman had overheard enough to understand. "Go, Olga," she urged softly. "We'll manage. I raised sick children before. He's in good hands. Do what you must and come home when you can." Overcome with gratitude and guilt, Olga nodded and quickly gathered her coat and school bag. With one last look at Sasha, who had closed his eyes, tears still leaking from the corners, she slipped out the door into the frigid morning. The bitter wind that hit her face felt almost like punishment. She hurried to the tram stop, each step heavy. The city was waking up around her, plumes of steam rising from building vents, people trudging through the snow. For once, she paid little attention to the world outside. Her thoughts were back in that small bedroom with her feverish son. At school, the assembly went off without a hitch. The children performed their skit admirably for the gathered students and teachers. No one in the audience would have guessed that their teacher's mind was elsewhere. Only a colleague, noticing the strain in Olga's smile, whispered, "Are you all right?" To which Olga simply nodded, not trusting herself to speak about it without tears. The minute her morning duties were done and another teacher could cover her midday class, Olga practically ran out of the school. She had informed the principal she had an urgent family matter, a phrase that thankfully he understood without pressing for details. Clutching a bag with some fresh oranges she'd managed to buy, a treat she'd obtained from the school nurse's stash for sick children, Olga rode the tram back home. Every jolt of the carriage made her impatient. Was Sasha okay? Had his fever spiked? She silently recited prayers, relics of childhood memory, begging for him to be all right. When she finally burst through the apartment door, she found Tamara sitting by Sasha's bed, wiping his face with a cool cloth. He was asleep, breathing raggedly but a bit easier than in the morning. Tamara pressed a finger to her lips and beckoned Olga to the kitchen. There, the older woman reported she'd given Sasha the prescribed syrup, kept his brow cool, and that he'd dozed off not long ago. Relief flooded Olga so intensely she had to sink into a chair. Tears she'd been holding back all morning slipped down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered to Tamara, voice shaking. "I don't know what I would do without you." True to her word, Olga stayed home for the next 2 days, having arranged for a colleague to take over her class. She nursed Sasha through the worst of his bronchitis, barely sleeping at night as she kept vigil by his side, much as she had when he was an infant. By the 3rd day, his fever broke. When he smiled wanly and said, "I feel a little better, Mama," Olga nearly wept again with gratitude. She returned to work once he was clearly on the mend, but those days of hovering between job and child had taken a toll. Her own body, running on fumes, succumbed to a bout of exhaustion and sniffles soon after. It was a clear reminder that even she had limits. Only after Sasha recovered did Olga fully realize how close she had been to collapsing from the strain of trying to be in 2 places at once. Despite such hardships, Olga rarely complained aloud. Like her mother Nina, she possessed a stoic resilience and a sense that her struggles were simply part of a larger collective effort. Many of her friends were in the same situation. One, a nurse, did double shifts at the clinic and then went home to care for her disabled father. Another, an engineer, juggled designing power grids with raising 3 lively boys. When these women gathered, as they did occasionally on a Sunday for tea, they would share stories that were a mix of humor and commiseration. They joked about perpetually having no time to lose weight because they were always running around, or how their husbands mysteriously became oh so busy when the laundry needed hanging or a diaper needed changing. There was laughter, eye-rolling, and the gentle catharsis of knowing they weren't alone. In quieter moments, often very late at night when she was the last one awake, Olga would reflect on how things had changed from her mother's time and how they hadn't. True, she had more comforts and conveniences, a private apartment, a refrigerator humming in the corner, acquired in the mid-60s after saving up, and even a simple twin-tub washing machine by the late 70s that semi-automated the laundry process. These items did lighten the physical drudgery a bit. And societally, women like her were everywhere in professional life. Doctors, lecturers, scientists, a real advance from Nina's youth when such prospects were rare. The state had also implemented some family friendly policies. Longer maternity leaves by the late 1970s, guaranteed jobs after childbirth, and modest child allowances for working mothers. But still, day to day, the mindset that housework and child rearing were women's work remained deeply ingrained. Even with supportive husbands, the expectation from society and internalized by women themselves was that a good woman managed her job and her household gracefully. If anything, the standard had become even higher: to be educated, career oriented, but also keep an impeccable home and raise brilliant children, essentially to be superhuman. On one occasion, in 1978, a local newspaper featured a profile of a woman in their town who was a hero of labor at the local factory and the mother of 6 children. The article praised how she somehow does it all, describing how her husband and older kids help, and how she attributes her energy to proper organization and socialist enthusiasm. Olga read that piece with mixed feelings. Part of her applauded the woman's achievements, but another part felt a pang of inadequacy. She had only 2 children and often felt overwhelmed. How did others manage so much more? Was she failing because she sometimes needed her mother-in-law's help, or because she couldn't always maintain the perfect Soviet image of cheerfulness? In such moments, Olga found comfort in remembering her own mother's stories of wartime survival. If Nina could raise 2 young children through war and famine on her own, surely Olga could handle these lesser hardships. And she reminded herself that not everything in those glowing newspaper profiles was as effortless as it appeared. Behind every Wonder Woman showcased, there were unseen sacrifices, perhaps health problems, or exhaustion, or other family members picking up the slack. As the 1980s approached, Olga was in her early 40s. Her daughter Vera was a teenager in secondary school, and Sasha not far behind. They were growing into fine young people, curious, kind, and perhaps a touch more candid with their opinions than earlier generations. Vera would sometimes challenge her mother with debates she picked up in youth magazines, which in the late Brezhnev era were cautiously beginning to question certain issues, like the need for more consumers, goods, or more openness. Olga, steeped in her loyal teacher ethos, would respond with gentle caution. One must trust that the leadership knew when and how to improve things. But privately, she too had hopes that the society to which she had given so much would in time appreciate and support women like her more tangibly. One evening, marking her last exam papers for the term, Olga wrote an encouraging comment on a girl's essay about career dreams. The girl had written that she wanted to become a scientist, but also have a big, happy family. Olga advised in the margin, "You can do anything with determination. Just remember to ask for help when you need it." After writing those words, she put her pen down and mused. Would the next generation of women find it easier to do anything? Would her Vera, if she chose a career and family, have more support? Perhaps a husband who shared housework equally, or a society more flexible to family needs? It was hard to say. Some things improved, others remained stubbornly the same. Change often came slowly, then all at once. Setting the graded essays aside, Olga prepared to retire for the night. As always, she checked on her sleeping children first. In the dim glow from the hallway light, she saw Vera sprawled amid textbooks. Her daughter had fallen asleep studying, earnest girl that she was. Olga quietly moved the books aside and draped a blanket over her. In Sasha's room, she picked up a fallen toy soldier and pulled his blanket up to his chin. In these tender, silent moments, the challenges of the day melted away, and she felt only love. Finally, before she went to bed, Olga tiptoed into the kitchen for a glass of water. She paused, noticing something on the little table. It was an open notebook. Her mother-in-law, Tamara's diary. Tamara had learned to write late in life and kept simple diaries of household notes and personal thoughts. Olga normally would never pry, but one sentence on the exposed page caught her eye. I thank God I could be here to help Olga. She does so much. These children need all our love. Olga gently closed the notebook, her eyes moist. She was reminded that the double burden was never truly borne alone. It was shared across generations, traded between mothers and grandmothers, husbands and wives, friends and neighbors. Everyone, in their own way, contributed a stitch to the fabric that kept daily life stitched together. With that thought warming her heart, Olga went to bed. In a few more years, the country and her life would head into yet another new chapter, the 1980s, with their own upheavals on the horizon. But on this quiet night in the late 70s, she felt a cautious optimism. Perhaps her children, growing up at the dusk of the Brezhnev era, might see the dawn of a more balanced life. Until then, she would continue doing her best each day in the classroom and at home, holding true to the belief that every lesson taught, every meal cooked, every comforting hug given was a small but meaningful step toward the better world they had all been promised. Youth and Ideals, A Student's Dream, 1980s. Late night hush fills the same apartment that once knew Nina's youthful footsteps. It is now the mid-1980s. The small living room is calm and quiet, illuminated only by the soft glow of a lamp on the table. Curled up at one end of the sofa is 18-year-old Elena, Lena, as everyone calls her, Nina's granddaughter. Normally by this hour all in the household are asleep. But tonight Lena's mind is too alive with thought for sleep to claim her just yet. A notebook lies open on her knees, and a pen twirls slowly between her fingers as she gazes at the window where a few snowflakes drift in the streetlight's glow. She has pushed aside the curtain slightly, letting the faint silver of moonlight mingle with the lamp's golden circle. The rest of the apartment is dim and silent. Her parents are asleep behind one closed door. Her grandmother Nina dozes in her armchair. Even the neighbors upstairs seem to have turned in. This pocket of solitude is one Lena has come to cherish. It is in these late hours, when the world around her is still, that she can hear the whisper of her own thoughts most clearly. By day, Lena is a first-year university student, walking the halls of academia, where great Soviet scientists and writers have walked before her. But by night, back at home in this modest flat, she is simply a young woman with a swirling mind and a heart full of both dreams and doubts. Now, in the quiet, she allows herself to just be. She taps the pen against her chin, rereading a few lines of a poem she's been crafting in her notebook. Writing, especially poetry, is her secret passion. On the page before her, verses are scribbled and scratched out, revised and rewritten. They're not homework or anything for school. They're just for her. She writes about the things she observes. The old maple tree outside the building, bravely budding each spring despite exhaust fumes, or the tired yet tender look in her mother's eyes when she thinks no one is watching. She writes about how it feels to be young and anxious in a time when everyone says the future is opening up, yet many doors still feel closed. She bends over her notebook and quietly reads the last lines she wrote. Afoot in two worlds, I seek a sky unbound. One hand carries the red banner, the other reaches for a cloud. She sighs and chews the end of the pen. It isn't exactly what she wants to say, but it's close. Afoot in two worlds. Yes, that's precisely how she feels. One world is the structured communal world her country and family have built for her, full of duty, tradition, and collective dreams inherited from her parents' and grandparents' time. The other is the inner world she is just beginning to explore, full of personal aspirations, curiosities, and questions that don't always have clear answers. Earlier this evening, those two worlds gently collided during tea with her grandmother. After dinner, Nina and Lena sat together on the sofa, sharing a pot of chamomile tea, a little ritual they keep whenever Lena isn't too swamped with studies. Nina had asked in her gentle way, "Are you happy at university, dear?" while stirring a spoon of honey into her cup. Lena had paused, swirling the tea in her own cup, searching for an honest answer. She told her grandmother about how exciting it was to learn so many new things, but admitted she sometimes felt conflicted, as though everyone expected her to already have her life planned out, her career path, her place in society, when in truth her heart pulled her in different directions. It's not that I don't want to do what's expected of me, Lena had said softly, mindful that her mother was in the next room. I do want to contribute and succeed. It's just that I also have dreams of my own that might not fit neatly into those expectations. Is that selfish? Nina had looked at her with such understanding in her wise gray eyes. She reached over and patted Lena's hand. When I was your age, she said quietly, I didn't have the luxury to choose my path. Life chose for me. But I had small dreams too. It's not wrong to have dreams for yourself, Lenochka. It's natural. The hope, I think, is that you can find a way to weave your dreams with what is good for others, not lose one for the other. Weave my dreams with what's good for others, Lena repeated, letting the phrase sink in. Trust Babushka to speak in a homespun metaphor that suddenly made sense of things. Weaving dreams, like threads in a fabric, so that personal desires and social duties aren't in opposition, but in harmony. I guess that is the trick, Lena had agreed, a small smile on her face. Maybe I can find a work that allows me to do something I love, but also helps people. She'd confided, for Nina was the one person she could tell frankly, that she sometimes imagined a career in writing or the arts, something creative, even though her parents gently pushed her towards something more practical, like economics or engineering. Her grandmother's response had been a story. Nina told her about once dreaming of becoming a nurse after the war to help deliver babies safely in the village, so no mother would go through what her own mother did. Life had other plans for me, Nina said with a wry smile, but I never told anyone that dream until now. Lena had squeezed her grandmother's hand, touched by that confidence. If Babushka could have a secret dream and still be such a pillar of her family and community. Perhaps Lena could find a way as well. Nina then said something Lena knew she would carry with her. You don't have to know it all tonight. You're only 18. It's okay not to have everything figured out. Hearing those words, Lena felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't realized she was carrying. How badly she needed that reassurance. She had hugged her grandmother then, whispering, "Thank you." They'd parted with a light laugh, Nina urging her not to stay up too late, scribbling in her notebook, and Nina retired to her armchair for the night. That was over an hour ago. Lena had tried to sleep, changed into her soft cotton nightdress, brushed out her long brown hair, even climbed under her blanket. But her mind was still churning with the evening's conversation and the mixture of relief and lingering uncertainty it brought. So she'd crept back out to the sofa with her notebook, hoping writing would soothe her toward slumber. And so here she is, pen in hand, capturing the mix of emotions she feels after talking with Babushka. The conversation reassured her that wanting personal fulfillment isn't wrong, but it didn't erase the practical concerns of how to please her parents or make a decent living. She wants to make them proud. Truly she does. And she also genuinely wants to contribute to society as she's been taught. But she doesn't want to lose herself in the process, to wake up one day and realize her own secret aspirations have withered away unpursued. Lena's eyes drift to her bookshelf across the room. On it stand textbooks on economics and computing, her current program of study, chosen because it was sensible and in demand. But tucked alongside them are volumes of Yesenin's poetry and a well-worn copy of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice in Russian translation, a guilty pleasure a friend lent her. Those books from other lands and times are windows into different worlds. They make her wonder what it might be like to travel beyond the Soviet Union's borders one day, to walk along Parisian boulevards, or see the mountains of India, or even take in New York City's skyline. Travel abroad isn't impossible, but isn't simple for ordinary citizens. Still, perhaps she could manage it in her lifetime if things kept opening up as they have been. The thought excites her, a flutter of possibility in her chest. She admired the celebrated women role models she learned about in school, scientists, pilots, even a cosmonaut, proof that a Soviet woman could achieve anything. In the main hallway of her university hangs a portrait of Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman in space, inspiring every girl who walks by. Lena feels proud of such achievements, yet her own aspirations are of a different kind. She might not soar into orbit, but perhaps she could one day send her words or ideas far beyond the horizon, touching people's minds and hearts in her own way. Catching herself in a reverie, Lena refocuses on her notebook. She writes a new couplet beneath her previous lines. Between duty and desire I stand, a child of the dawn, tomorrow calls with voices of both memory and hope drawn. She taps the pen, not fully satisfied but willing to leave the poem be for now. The wave of drowsiness she'd hoped for is finally washing over her. Perhaps the chamomile tea she drank earlier is taking effect. She closes the notebook and sets it on the side table atop the literary journal from her university, in which she has secretly submitted a poem under a pseudonym. The results will be announced next month. Sliding down into the sofa cushions, Lena pulls a knitted throw-up around her shoulders. She's too sleepy to trudge back to her bed. Besides, from here she can see the night sky through the sliver of exposed window. The stars are faint due to the city's glow, but she finds the Big Dipper and traces its ladle shape with her finger in the air. How many nights had her ancestors done the same? She wonders. Did they make wishes on these same stars? Her rotary telephone sits silent on the side table. Sometimes she imagines it ringing with a friend's voice, urging her out on a spontaneous nighttime adventure. That's what youth is supposed to be about, right? Yet hers is mostly study and family obligations so far. Still, one of these days, she promises herself, she'll do something unexpected. Perhaps take a summer trip to the Baltic Sea with her classmates or volunteer for a work project in Siberia just to see another horizon. Her eyes grow heavy. In her fading wakefulness, Lena murmurs a few lines of the lullaby her grandmother often hums, the same lullaby Nina sang to her daughters decades ago. It comforts her even now, as a nearly grown woman, to whisper, Bayou, Bayushki, Bayou. The melody floats softly, and she imagines all the women of her family, stretching back through the years, singing the same tune to their little ones. Thump. A gentle sound startles her. Her notebook has slipped from the side table to the floor. She considers picking it up, but sleep is overtaking her at last. She leans her head back against the cushion and lets her eyes fall shut. In a half-dream state, images flit by. She sees herself walking across a graduation stage to receive a diploma while her parents beam with pride. Then she is typing furiously at a typewriter in a sunny room overlooking a foreign city. Then her grandmother appears young and strong beside her, smiling from a wheat field. Just before she drifts off completely, Lena becomes dimly aware of the floorboards creaking, perhaps Babushka checking on her, as she sometimes does in the night. Lena doesn't stir. She feels the familiar weight of a knitted blanket being drawn up over her shoulders and catches the faint scent of her grandmother's soap. In her sleepy haze, she smiles, comforted beyond words. She is loved. She is not alone. As Lena surrenders to sleep, her last conscious thought is a gentle resolve. I will find my way. A way to honor where I come from and also who I am. With that, the young woman's breathing slows and deepens, joining the nocturnal rhythm of the household. Whatever tomorrow holds, questions or answers, challenges or triumphs, will come in its time. For now, wrapped in her grandmother's quiet care and the embrace of her family's history, Lena floats into peaceful dreams, a child of the dawn awaiting the morning's new light. Generations and Dreams, A Grandmother's Reflection, 1980s. It is deep night once again, and Nina Ivanovna sits wakeful in her armchair, watching over her sleeping family as she has done in one way or another for nearly half a century. The lamp is turned low now, casting a gentle glow on her lined face and silver hair. The apartment is silent except for the ticking of an old wall clock and the soft snores of her son-in-law behind a closed door. Outside, the winter wind has stilled, so the world is as quiet as it ever becomes in a Soviet city. Nina gazes at her granddaughter Lena's serene face, partially visible in the dimness. The girl fell asleep on the sofa while writing in that notebook of hers, verses perhaps. Nina tiptoed over earlier and draped a blanket around her shoulders, marveling at how a creature who had been an infant in her arms not so long ago now writes poems at midnight about her place in the world. Nina had caught a glimpse of Lena's notebook pages filled with looping script and felt both pride and a protective pang. This young generation has the luxury to dream and question in ways Nina's did not. She is glad for that. It is what they worked for, yet she worries too. The world can be hard on dreamers. Settling back in her armchair, Nina's thoughts begin to wander through time. How many nights like this has she seen? In her youth during the war, she spent many a night by a lantern, mending clothes or cradling a sick child, steeling herself for what dawn would bring. In middle age, during the long workdays of Reconstruction, she often collapsed into bed right after supper, too exhausted to even dream. And now, in her later years, she often finds herself wakeful in the wee hours, mind drifting across memories as the younger ones sleep. It is a time for reflection, a quiet interlude when the tapestry of her life unfurls in her mind's eye. She thinks of her mother, Agafia, who bore the burdens of a peasant wife and widow in harsher times, and of Galia and Olga, her two strong daughters, who each shouldered their own double loads in the factory and the classroom. She thinks of all the women like them whose individual experiences have differed, one wielding a hoe, another chalk, yet who all have known the exhaustion of the double shift and the deep fulfillment of nurturing loved ones. Nina's gaze shifts to the small table near her armchair. On it stands a framed photograph of Galia and Olga together, smiling in front of the big fountain in their town square, arm in arm in their summer dresses. That photo is from 1960, when both were young mothers and came home for a visit. Nina remembers how rare and joyous that reunion was. Next to it is a yellowing propaganda postcard from 1952, depicting a radiant mother and father, each holding a baby under a banner that reads "Our Happiness." As a much younger woman, Nina used to stare at that postcard, torn between cynicism and hope. It showed an ideal that often felt far from her reality. Still, she kept it, perhaps as a reminder of the promise of what could be. Another item catches her eye, a small medal lying flat in its box, the Labor Glory Medal that Galia received for her decades at the textile plant. It isn't an order of Lenin or anything so grand, but to Nina it is precious because it symbolizes her daughter's perseverance. How proud Nina felt pinning it on Galia's dress the day it arrived. These little artifacts, photos, postcards, medals, they are like anchors of memory sitting quietly in the room with her. Nina's thoughts gently turn to the future. She imagines a day, perhaps when Lena is her age, where a great-granddaughter of hers might live in a world where the balance is gentler. In that world, perhaps kitchens have clever machines to handle the cooking and cleaning, and fathers are as likely as mothers to tuck children into bed after a long day, changes that would have seemed like fantasy in Nina's youth. She chuckles softly at the thought. Perhaps nothing so dramatic will come to pass, but even a small part of that vision coming true would be a blessing. She imagines that, although decades of communism have eliminated old forms of patriarchy, women's daily burdens might finally ease a bit, and their opportunities further expand. She sees small signs already. Her grandson Misha, now a young father, proudly helps his wife with their toddler. She had nearly fallen off her chair with laughter and pride the day she heard him brag that he could swaddle their infant or cook porridge just as well as his wife, claims no man of Nina's era would have thought to make. It was a small revolution within the home, one she welcomed with delight. These small changes, husbands pushing prams in the park, or young fathers like Misha boasting about changing nappies and rocking babies to sleep, would have been unimaginable when Nina was a young wife. Times do change, little by little. In the silence, Nina allows herself a rare moment to dream further. She envisions that if the women of her line, herself, her mother, her daughters, and now Lena, could speak across time to some future young woman of their family, they would each have wisdom and strength to share. Her mother, Agafia, who bore life's hardships with silent endurance, would teach resilience and faith. Nina would teach perseverance and the power of love that carries one through the darkest nights. Galia and Olga would teach determination and the importance of both work and family. And Lena, when her time comes, will add her own lessons, perhaps creativity, self-assertion, and the courage not to settle for less than what she deserves. Nina smiles in the darkness. The weight of the years feels light in this reflective hush, as if she can finally set down a heavy sack she's carried for too long. Her life, with all its toil and triumph, has been worth it. It has built a foundation from which the younger ones can climb higher. The thought that each generation might climb a little higher than the last brings her a quiet sense of fulfillment. The dream of her youth, of true emancipation and a better life for her daughters, is perhaps not fully realized, but it is closer. She thinks of the heroines celebrated in her country, women like Valentina Tereshkova, who in 1963 soared into space and proved that no frontier was beyond a woman's reach. How Nina's heart swelled with pride that day, seeing a woman from a humble background, not unlike Galia or Olga, orbit the earth. It felt like a piece of her own dream coming true in another's life. And she sees that same pioneering spirit in smaller ways around her, in Lena's insistence on writing her own verses, in the female factory foreman who replaced Galia when she retired, in the new young doctor, a woman, at the local clinic who treated Nina last winter with such respect and care. Nina carefully rises from her armchair and walks to the window. She draws the curtain aside a few inches and looks out at the quiet street 5 floors below. Snow has dusted the parked ladas and formed a soft blanket on the empty playground across the way. The world looks clean, innocent, like it's been tucked under a white quilt. Nina places a hand on the cold glass. Once upon a time, she was a little girl staring at winter stars through the window of a wooden hut, dreaming of what her life might become. She could never have imagined the full journey, the sorrows and joys, the losses and gifts that awaited her. She sends up a silent thought, not quite a prayer. She's long been a good atheist officially, but a hope sent to the universe nonetheless. May my grandchildren have good lives. May they know both how to work and how to find joy. May they be spared the worst, but if hardships come, may they meet them together. She hopes that the sacrifices of her generation and those before were not in vain, that they truly paved the way for something better. Turning from the window, Nina looks once more at Lena, sleeping soundly beneath the knitted blanket Nina made years ago. The girl's notebook lies on the rug where it fell. Nina quietly picks it up. By the lamp's light, she can't help but read a line or two. Tomorrow calls with voices of both memory and hope. Nina's eyes mist at the poignant truth of her granddaughter's words. Yes, she thinks, we gave you our memories so you could carry our hope. She places the notebook on the table and gently smooths Lena's hair, which is spread like a dark fan across the pillow. Lena stirs slightly but does not wake. Nina whispers, barely audible, "Sleep well, Malaya, sweetheart." The young woman's face is peaceful. Nina returns to her armchair and turns off the lamp. The room is now lit only by the faint gray glow of the snowy night. She closes her eyes, the darkness behind her eyelids warm and calm. Let us leave Nina Ivanovna in this quiet moment, keeping watch over the dreams of those she loves. Theirs is a tale of endurance and hope, of work and love intertwined. Through war and peace, through scarcity and progress, the women of this family and so many families have given of themselves to weave a life for the next generation. Now, at last, it is time for Nina too to rest, knowing that the thread will continue in capable hands. The listener of these memories, you, can now also rest, knowing that through all the tides of history, the gentle strength of women like Nina has carried families and communities forward. Their stories reassure us that love and perseverance flourish even in the hardest times, and that each day's end brings the promise of renewal. Good night and sweet dreams. As you take a deep breath and close your eyes, feel the hush of the night embracing you, just as it embraced them. You too are watched over by the quiet stars and the gentle hopes carried through time. Rest now, warm and safe, and let sleep welcome you until the dawn. You have journeyed through these memories and now return to your own quiet space, sheltered and at peace. The night is patient and kind around you, ready to cradle you in gentle sleep until morning. Sleep well,